Okay, hi everyone. I'm joined today by Annette Cairns, and Annette, like myself, started her business a little bit later in life. Coming from a corporate world job into self-employment. So, Annette, hi, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Great to have you. So, Annette, tell us a little bit about you and your business and life before your business and what made you. I'm going to say burn your boats because I've just done a recent YouTube video about how I've recently burnt my boats and kind of cut the lifeline to what was my safety net. And you kind of did the same, didn't you? Tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Yeah, so I set up 3 years ago, just prior to lockdown, and it had been very much, I'd been thinking about it for years and hadn't really done anything. And I thought, right, I need to do something. I set up the business on the company's house and thought, right, that's it. This is going to be my deadline. And that kind of deadline just kept going, pushing on. And then I was having a conversation. I had to report directly into the chief exec, and he had a conversation where essentially he said, this is what I want you to do. If you don't like it, I want a one-line resignation. and I thought, okay. And I didn't do anything for a couple of weeks, and then saw him again, and he reiterated that. And some of the things he was asking me to do, I just thought, yeah, I'll do them, but I'm not that comfortable. And it was moving further and further away from the bit that really interested me. So I thought, that's it. I'll do it. I had no savings. I had no money. I had no idea what I was really going to do. I had the name of a business and I had an idea of kind of what I was going to do. I was really lucky in that about a month later, so about a month and a half into my notice period, he all of a sudden realized that he didn't have anyone to bridge the gap. So we had a negotiation about how I could bridge the gap between me leaving and somebody else starting. So I did a whole load of stuff that I really enjoyed doing before I left, and had a couple of opportunities after I left to work with the company, which was great because it gave me a little bit of a cushion, which was a bit of relief when lockdown started and my diary emptied faster than the dog's breakfast bowl, which was a bit of a worry. And what I really wanted to do, I knew that I wanted to train and I wanted to coach. And where I was an organizational development manager, and I was getting further and further away from it.
What is organizational development manager mean?
So in this context, it was head of learning and development. So it was looking after management development, talent management. It also had mandatory training in it. So it was essentially learning and development manager. And I was just getting further and further into reports and doing all the things I hated doing. And also I recognize I'm not really good at doing. So it was just, I know that I needed something to push me into it, because otherwise I would have just hung on and just done things. And this just seemed like a good idea. Right, that's it. I'm just going to go.
And did you have any sort of business knowledge? Did you have any skills around staffing or running a business? Or was it brand new?
Totally brand new. Never run my own business before. I'd worked in a training consultancy before. I'd worked in sales before. So the sales part of it didn't necessarily worry me. I think what's always worried me is the finding the people to sell to. So the marketing side,
rather than the sales. Yeah. And you can't have one without the other, really.
No, well, exactly. So when I started, I was total novice, knew nothing. I knew I had to set up the business with Company's House, which I did. And I also knew that I'm rubbish with money. So the worst thing I could possibly do is try and do my own books. So the first thing I did was find an accountant who did all the real setting up of the business, set me up with zero, and gave me I don't know, did they give me advice? No, not really. But I've had zero. I knew I wouldn't look after the money unless I had some way of doing that. I knew that my receipts would just stack up in a corner unless I could force myself to find a way of doing it. So that was my first thing. And then also during lockdown with bounce back loans, I wasn't going to take anything out. And I thought, right, one of the things I know is that marketing is my weak point. So I took out a bounce back loan of £5,000 and found somebody to do my marketing. It was very ad hoc to start with, but she's just pointed me in the right direction and just really helped me. So for me, it was about recognizing what I didn't know and finding someone else to do those things.
Yeah, and that's quite a brave move to take, because these things aren't free. You have to pay people, and it can be quite hard to outsource before you've got an income coming in. Now, you're not diagnosed as having ADHD, but I think we've had a few conversations, and we believe there's probably some ADHD-like behaviours, if not full ADHD. We don't know. And I think what you're saying is quite true of a lot of us who do have ADHD. We're not great with money. We're not great with the detail. We're not great with the boring administrative side of the business in general. And it was quite astute, I think, really, to pick that up so early in the business. I also think when you're in the training or coaching or knowledge world, actually, it's always, I've heard so many people, and myself included, get their first client who was their old employer, or somebody who's very close to them. They've tapped into their existing network, and that gave you a bit of a buffer then. So tell me a little bit about what you set up. So tell me about Greenshed.
So Greenshed talent development was absolutely that. It was set up to be able to do talent development, so helping anyone or any organization to build that potential. So it was coaching, so I'm an accredited coach, and it was also doing the training bit, which was the bit I love doing, and that was about it. That was what I went, all right, I'm going to find someone to train, and that was essentially where I went from.
And how did you, so you had your kind of buffer time with your previous employer. Where did you get your first client from after that buffer?
Utter persistence. So most of my clients, I think probably 90% of my clients have been from previous contacts, and so people I've either worked with in the past or a contact who's recommended me to someone else. I have to say, looking back on it, lockdown, whilst it was really scary and I was sort of down to my last £300, was brilliant because it stopped me running, made me stop and really think, what is it I'm doing? And it also gave me the opportunity to network. So I met people such as yourself, and I met other people who I've done work with in the last 3 years. So whilst it was a horrible time, and I often sat at my desk rocking backwards and forwards, I really decided that I can't do anything. I haven't got any business. So what can I do to really hook up with all the people I'd known before? So I'm sure they were getting emails from me all the time going, hi, how's it going? Isn't it awful, this lockdown? What can I do? So it was persistence. And for me, that was quite difficult because I felt that I was being a right pest to people, and actually keep writing emails. And then it struck me that when I was in business, the people who stuck in my mind were the people who kept sending me things. So your email has to land at the right time. And it's not that people aren't wanting to get back to you. It's just that it's not the right time. So persistence was key to that. But my first client, my first real, felt like this is the first one I've got, came as a result of an introduction from somebody I'd done work with when I was in a training consultancy before I was OD manager. And that was 18 months of sheer persistence.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we need to kind of understand. It's persistence and consistency. So following up, I'm not great with a follow-up, I must admit. I think women in particular struggle a little bit with the idea of selling ourselves. And of course, if you're trying to sell, it is difficult. But if you know that you've got something that can help your client, coming at it from a position of, you know, this is what I'm doing. I know we've worked together in the past. I know this is something that you value. Can we have a conversation? Or however that might look. We do need to get away from this idea that we're giving people something they don't want. That's where the whole icky selling bit comes in, being forced to feel like you're buying something you don't want. But I think if you know your audience well, and you know what they need, and you know that your product, service, whatever it might be, is a good fit, then it's not about selling them something they don't need. It's about solving the problem that they have. And it's a big mindset shift, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think for me, one of the mindset shifts, and which is still happening, is I'm not unique. I'm not selling anything that other people aren't selling. And for me, that was, I just kept asking myself the question, why would they want to hear from me? I'm not, you know, I'm doing leadership training. There's hundreds of people out there doing leadership training. Why come to me? And that's been a real shift. And I'm not sure I'm entirely there now, is to say, yes, I do have the same content as lots of other people, but what I bring is me. And that's the unique bit.
I would challenge you on the bit that when you said, I'm not unique. You are absolutely unique. And I think we all have this, and we think our market is saturated, and we think there's no room for us. But if you've ever been to Chinatown in London, you walk through Chinatown and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of Chinese restaurants, all selling pretty much the same thing. And they all exist and coexist together. And people, you know, they're all thriving because they all have their unique USP, you know, their unique selling point, unique selling point, their unique selling point. And that, certainly in the knowledge world, if we're a self-employed freelancer, we are our unique selling point. Nobody else is Annette, nobody else is me. And that's why I think there's no real room for worrying about a competitive market when it comes to the coaching world, because people will buy you because of you.
Absolutely. And that has been the shift. And you know, I was thinking earlier, there's lots of things that I haven't done because I think, well, loads of other people are doing that, so why do an income to me? And it's really been a point where I go, actually, that might be the case. Is that a fear of failure? Is that a fear that somebody's going to go, well, I don't want to use you? And it's moving away from thinking that it's personal, because they, you know, I think one of the things I've recognized is that it's important to be me. It's important to be my weird, quirky self, because that's what people are buying. They're not necessarily buying the content, they're buying how I deliver it.
Yeah. And the truth is, you know, if there's a relationship and they're like you, they won't just buy from you once, they're likely to come back and buy from you again and again.
Exactly.
So it's got to be more than just a transaction. I think the way we do business in general now is much more personal. Social media has made the face of most businesses much more a human face as opposed to just a logo. And especially in the coaching world, I think it's more than ever, we are our product. I think it's interesting as well that you've just gone through a big rebrand. Talk us through the rebrand. We are going to come into the type of coaching that you do, because that's another question I want to ask you. But you've rebranded after what, 4 years?
3 years, yes.
3 years. 3 years, okay.
So my first branding was brilliant. It absolutely did what I wanted it to do. It got my name out there. It made me feel comfortable with the brand, with the name. But I think over the last 3 years of being self-employed, I think there was a lot of questions for me around, so what are my values? Who am I? You know, I was saying people are buying me. So who am I? And I found that there were quite a few things that I was kind of hiding, not consciously, but not stepping into it, which sounds a bit coaching speak. And I just thought it's time. I've spent a lot of time on working out what my values are and what I think I bring, and a bit more time thinking is, what do I bring? And I didn't feel that my branding, which was essentially a logo, it wasn't a brand, it was a logo that looked very lovely. it wasn't really reflecting me, and it wasn't consistent. So I'd kind of look at it and I'd be writing proposals and I'd be thinking, oh, well, I want to chuck this in here and chuck that. So I thought it's time to find something that I feel I can really put myself behind and has a consistency across everything I do. And what's been really fascinating is I launched it last week. Was it last week or the week before? And so many of people have said it's so you. And that's been really strange, because I kind of looked at it and thought, well, I love it, I think it's great, but everybody has said it's really you, and I don't think I'd seen that before.
No.
So it feels so right. And there'll be people who hate it. They're not my target.
Exactly. And that, I think we worry sometimes that if we make ourselves too narrow, we'll get onto niching and things in a moment. But your brand is that as well. Your brand is part of the niche. Totally. So if people don't like quirky with a quirky sense of humor, and I know you have exactly that. If people want a very corporate, straight-laced, by the book, black and white coach or trainer, you are never going to be the right fit for them. But your brand, I must say, your brand before was nice. Well, there's the word. It was nice.
Yeah, it was fun.
The brand now is bright. It says, look, we do things differently around here. We don't do the boring leadership training. We don't do the boring coaching. We do it my way. Yep. And that's not going to appeal to everybody. But if it doesn't appeal, then there would never. There'd have been a misalignment had they bought you on your old Absolutely. Logo, I think.
Absolutely. And for me, it was 3 years in, it felt right. I very deliberately thought I need to spend some money on this. So it's not been expensive, but it's not been cheap. But I just really knew that. So one of the things I think I've done, and I'm quite proud of, is just recognize where my strengths are and where they're not. And yeah, I'm very creative, and I knew exactly what wasn't right, but I didn't know how to put it right, if that makes sense. So I worked very closely with somebody on my brand, and she showed me loads of different options. And there were a couple of things she put in, like light pink, and instantly I look at it and go, that's really not me. Don't even bring that color anywhere near me again. And I think sometimes we know what's not right, but don't necessarily know how to put it right. Yeah. And that's where I think it's been really useful to get advice, to get help to do that. I keep saying to myself, it'll only take 1 or 2 clients to pay it off, but I've said that for quite a few things. So.
I think there is another fact here that we need to make clear, though. I don't think you need to spend all of that money on your brand right from day one. And I think if the idea of, oh my God, I've got to have this perfect brand and it's got to reflect me and my values. I don't even know what my values are, and it's going to cost me this much money, and I haven't even got enough money to have an email provider. What am I going to do? I won't do anything. Don't do that. Start where you are. Start with what you've got. Start tapping into your old network. Start getting out networking. You don't even need a website, to get started. You don't let those things hold you back.
No, and I have to say, I have had a website right from the beginning, and I've done nothing with it, so it was a bit of a waste of a website. I think absolutely, and that's why it felt right for me to rebrand now, is because I have had those questions. I have really been thinking, so what is it I'm doing? As I said, right from the start, I set up this business, moving away from something rather than what I wanted to do. So it was very much, I don't want to be in corporate life anymore. I don't want to be writing reports. I don't want to be told what to do. I hadn't really thought about what is it I actually do want to do, except a very nebulous, I want to train and I want to coach. I hadn't really thought, okay, who's my ideal client? What's my niche? What's my brand? I hadn't thought of any of those things. And that was fine. It's taken me, and it's still a journey. It's taken me 3 years to get to the point where I think, yeah, it's time to really shout about who I am. I think there's so many other things you can do. I mean, social media is such a great way of getting your personality out there. And I think for me, it was very much when I first started, it was very much being very tidy and just thinking about how I wrote things, and being very corporate speak. And I think my old logo was very corporate in a way. It was very restrained. and I think
Safe, I would think I would call it.
safe. Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think it's so safe now. And it's taken me this long to just go, ah!
I think, how did you feel about LinkedIn? I remember when I very first started on LinkedIn, I had this idea it was this really professional space, and I had so much identity problem with it. The whole imposter syndrome was huge around LinkedIn, because I'd always been on Facebook. I dabbled a little bit with Instagram, but LinkedIn seemed to be where all the real proper business people and professionals sat. And I really struggled to begin with. I remember my name, I had it on my name shown on LinkedIn as Beverly Thorogood. And nobody calls me Bev. Nobody calls me Beverly. I've been Bev all my life. The only time I ever used to get called Beverly was when I was in trouble. So I have a real kind of mental issue with being called Beverly. And yet there I was on my profile, called myself Beverly. And I remember looking at it and thinking, why? What's sitting at the root of that? And it was because Bev feels very casual, and it didn't feel like LinkedIn was the place to be casual. I've completely changed. I love LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn, maybe it's changed over the years, and I got in later, when before it was sort of more relaxed. But I think the posts that I've put out there, and I think you'd agree with this as well, the posts that get the best response and have the most impact are when I'm less professional. It's when I'm, being a little bit more me, being a little bit more warts and all. And I've had, 85 or so % of my business for the last 5 years has come directly inbound from LinkedIn. So I think that's another thing that often, I think, when we're starting in business, if we've never had a business before, LinkedIn can feel like a scary space. Networking can feel like a scary space. The identity issue feels scary. Do you relate to any of that? You're smiling.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, LinkedIn, I didn't really know about LinkedIn. I'd been on LinkedIn for years, but I'd never really posted it. It was a kind of, you have to be on LinkedIn because, everybody is in business wise. So it didn't scare me. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I think you're right, is that the personal posts are the ones that definitely get the best engagement. I think I probably came to it at a good time, because during lockdown, the first part of lockdown, there were a lot more personal posts and people going, what is going on? So I was able to be more of myself. It's funny, isn't it? There are certain things that I'm really scared of. And LinkedIn has never been one. Podcasts, talking like this has never really been something that I'm scared about. It's just never kind of get on to do one. So I think you're right. It's about really being yourself, because if you're thinking about personal brand and if people buy you, then trying to be somebody else on LinkedIn, whether it's trying to write in a very professional way, is not really going to reflect you. So if people do then decide to connect with you, they either will be very disappointed that you're not the professional person you appeared to be, or really elated that you're not. So that for me was quite easy to be me, because of the time that I was more prevalent on there. Yeah, I was going to say something.
Would you say LinkedIn has been a good place for you in terms of business?
No.
That's interesting.
No, I think I've had one client from LinkedIn, which was potentially a very big client, and it was lovely to do, and they've not come back to me. So no, I don't think it is. Having said that, I think it's a long game. I think with marketing in general, it's a long game, and I know I've got a lot of followers, I've got a lot of connections, and the engagement I tend to get is good. So I suspect I've got a lot of stalkers.
The problem with LinkedIn is, and LinkedIn for coaches in particular, is that there are a lot of coaches, and the very fact of being a coach is so broad. So it's very, very hard to know, well, is this the right person for me? And I think with your brand change, what I've noticed is that you're talking much more about a particular area of what you're delivering. I'm, mentioned niching before, and there's always different trains of thought on this. Don't go too niche, especially not in the beginning, because you narrow your market and you might not be where you want to be. But I am a massive believer that if you're not incredibly clear about who you help and what you help them with, especially on LinkedIn, people will see you, people will love you, people will follow you, but they won't work with you because they don't actually know what it is you do.
Yeah.
So I know you've started talking much more about one of your first loves, which is human factors. Tell us a little bit about human factors and how you are now starting to maybe be a little bit more focused on your messaging.
So human factors is something that I'm fascinated by, and I first got introduced to it when I was working for a chain of hospitals. And the clinical director said to me, look, I want to put a course together about human factors. And I thought, what are they? And the more research I did, the more it made sense to me, some of the things that had happened to me in my medical history, which was a defining factor in my whole life. And I think the fascinating thing for me about human factors is, one, not many people know what they are. It's very clear in the aviation industry what it is, and it's very clear in medicine and healthcare what human factors are. And I think those two sectors are two sectors that I work in, and they kind of understand what it is. So for me, it's about how can I then link an understanding of human factors, which with my other love, which is leadership development. And it strikes me, if you can be more aware of the factors that affect you in how you bring yourself to work, then you can have a much better impact on yourself, but also a much better impact on those around you. But if you don't recognize what's impacting you, then it's really difficult to then do anything about it.
Are you able to give us sort of a one-line definition of human factors? So we just talked about this before we came online. Human factors, there are a number of different factors that are to do with our human nature and our human behavior, but actually human factors is a concept in itself, isn't it? So it is a whole that consists of lots of different elements.
Yeah, and the HSC, and I wish I'd got it in front of me, but the HSC say it's those organizational, personal, managerial, environmental factors that impact us in a way that might cause an accident or a mistake. So it's very much understanding all the things around you that impact and could, in a health and safety perspective, cause an incident to happen.
So it's really, I love this subject because I taught it for a long time as well. So it's about looking at those external factors and how we interact with those factors, isn't it? So things like the ergonomics of and design of something. And this is where it kind of originated. We're going to come back to why this is relevant to people with ADHD and people in business in a second, but you kind of have to understand what human factors is in the first place. It started with aviation. They realized that a very low percentage of aircraft crashes were actually caused by mechanical failure. It was human error. And it was human error a lot of the time because the cockpit design wasn't optimized for habitual behaviors. So, for example, they might have had a couple of levers or buttons next to each other that could have quite dire consequences if you hit the wrong one.
Yeah.
But when stress and things like that kick in and we don't think quite so clearly, it's very easy to hit the wrong button with fatal consequences. So it was about ergonomics initially. But then they started to include things like the effect of other people's behavior on your behavior,
Completely.
effect of leadership styles on somebody's behavior, the effect of systems and processes and standard operating procedures and how they impact on your behavior. And it became this much bigger bigger thing.
And I think the additional thing to that I would always add is that what's going on in here. So if you really tired, for example, you can have the best systems in the world, but if you're really tired, your brain's not working right, potentially. So you may make a mistake. And I think it's recognizing that it's when all these factors align that you're most likely to have mistakes or make mistakes.
I remember, we've used loads of analogies when we've been teaching, but I remember somebody talking about that really made me understand that this is relevant to everybody. Yes. The story that was, if you've got a heart surgeon goes to the canteen at lunchtime to get some food in a hospital, and he's stood in a queue waiting, and then when he gets to the end, they mess up his lunch, and he's waiting, he knows he's got to be somewhere, and they're dithering, and he's getting stressed, or she, let's not be sexist about this, he or she, and he's already under this sort of time pressure. And then he gets a stroppy server who's a bit short with him. They possibly had a bad day or whatever, and it comes across to the surgeon. Yep. The surgeon then goes into potentially his next, goes into theatre already in the mindset of wound up and frustrated. Or maybe it's been, somebody's opened their pay statement and realised that they've messed up their pay, and they've got a whole load of direct debits that are going to go out and not be met because somebody in the pay department messed up. And it's this knock-on effect, this kind of build-up that then leads to errors, omissions, and incidents.
And I think one of the really useful models of human factors is the 3 buckets model, which is a really simple model, but it basically says there's self, all the things that are happening to you, and mood, emotion, life, work, all that kind of stuff. Then there's another one, which is tasks. So how you're actually going about things, and the equipment you're using, and the environment you're using, and how well prepared you are, and how trained you are. And then there's the final one, which is context, which I kind of like to split into 2. So there's the context around, environment, the weather, that kind of stuff. But there's also a really key part there is human interaction, how the team's working, how your boss has been spoken to, etc. And the principle is that during the day things go into these buckets, and that's fine. That's life. But it's about recognizing when those buckets are starting to overflow, because when those buckets overflow is when you're more likely to make a mistake. And so it's about, okay, what's going into this bucket? Can I do anything about it now? In which case, do it. So if I'm really hungry, for example, go and have something to eat. If my pay slips wound me up, go and talk to finance straight away. Or is it something in there? So say there's a process that I can't do anything about today. So I'm accepting it's in there, but I have to recognize that if I don't do anything about it in the long term and other things go into that bucket, that might eventually overflow. And that really makes sense to me. I mean, I'm quite a visual person, so seeing those buckets filling and little bits of paper with stuff happening really makes sense. But it is exactly as you say, the more things that happen, we can cope with it most of the time. But when it's often one thing that might just tip the balance.
Well, they talk about the cheese, the cheese holes, lining up the cheese holes, don't they? The sort of slices of Swiss cheese with the holes in, and most of the time they're not, you can get through one hole, but you'll be blocked at the next hole.
Yeah, you've got lines of defense.
When the holes align and suddenly everything kind of goes wrong. So where does this fit into, because obviously this podcast is really about people in business, starting their own business, freelancers, working for themselves. Surely this isn't really anything to do with them, because we don't work in a big organization now.
And I think it comes back to recognizing what's happening with yourself. For me, as I said to you before, it was about recognizing that I have holes. To use a Swiss cheese analogy, I have holes that if I don't find something to plug those holes, that I'm going to start making mistakes. I'm going to start forgetting things. I'm going to miss out on things. I'm going to forget filing my tax return, heaven forbid. So it is about recognizing yourself, what's going on, and then putting in place strategies that will plug those holes, and accepting that you can't do everything. I think that was one of the biggest learnings for me, is I didn't know anything about running a business, and you don't have to. Just because you are self-employed and running your own business doesn't mean to say that you can't find other means of plugging those holes and other means of supporting you. But it's about recognizing it in the first place. So I recognize that I'm not good with money, so I get an accountant. I recognize I'm not very good at remembering things. Now I have the choice. I'm rubbish at remembering things. I have the choice of, you should see my desk, it's covered in post-it notes. And I've chosen lots and lots of different ways of writing to-do lists. So from paper to on my computer, and none of them work. I laugh and say I have aspirational to-do lists, because I never get through them. And I usually forget where they are. So it's about finding something that works for you, and it may be different for everyone, and it might change. So, you know, I know at the moment I'm using Amazon Scribe because it's kind of working for me. If I lose it, I'll have to find something else. I had a very good starting point when I first set up the business, as I had a different notebook for different things. And after a while, they all sort of merge. So I know that I'm going to have to find a way to sort those out, which works for me.
And this is where really we get into the systems and automation and use. We've probably never been at a better time in history for managing ourselves as an individual in a small business. We've got so many great bits of software that can automate things, that can remind us of things, that can synchronize everything so we don't have to remember everything. The problem is, I think, when you first get started, a lot of those systems feel daunting. They're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. But again, that's where, you know, you don't need to. You can always bring somebody in to give you a hand. And one thing I would say I did notice is that people in business are incredibly generous at sharing what they know. And you can ask it, and people don't. I assumed everybody would hold on to all of the knowledge, and that's not been my experience at all. So, and we also, just as a quick plug here, I have a Facebook group I've just started called the Adapt Women's Network, which is specifically for women who are starting or in the early stages of growing a business. And we do talk about getting your tech set up, and but you know, managing your mindset, because actually the mindset piece is a huge part of human factors. Totally. Understanding your emotions. If you get up one day and your energy is really rubbish because you barely slept, or you've just had a row with the kids getting them out to school, then that's probably not the best time to go and have a sales call with a potential client. And actually recognizing your own state, emotional state, and working with that. So we talk about mindset and.
Well, I think there's also recognize it. So it's a big step to recognizing it. You know, I recognize that I've just had an argument with my husband. Well, that's one thing. I've had an argument with my husband, but what's the impact it's having on me? And to be able to shift and think, what's the impact it's having on me, and what can I do about it? And it's different for everyone. So I know that you can have strategies, you know, like, you know, a lot of NLP. So, well, let's change it from fear to excitement. It's finding what really works for you, and being comfortable with that. So I am a bit of a technophobe. I do use tech, and I do like using tech, and I like spending money on tech and then forgetting about it. And that's okay. It's okay. It's okay to not do these things if they don't sit comfortably with you. It's finding something else that works for you that's the important part about it. You know, I think it's really easy to look at other people in business and think they're being really successful. I mean, you go on LinkedIn, everybody's really successful on LinkedIn, aren't they? I mean, you know, everybody's got loads and loads of business, and they're doing far better than you. And stop comparing. That's been the big learning for me.
Because you don't know how long that person's been in business. You don't know how honest they're being. Nobody's going to go on to LinkedIn and say, my business is failing miserably, I'm rubbish at this. But we all go through peaks and troughs. Actually, COVID, I think, did us a lot of favors there, because people were a little bit more open about the struggles they were having.
Yeah.
But yes, I think you're right. It's not just about recognizing that you might be a bit emotional, or you might be a bit cross, or you might be a bit angry. It's also about, okay, so what do I need to do?
Yeah.
A, to change my state if necessary, or to change my schedule so that I'm actually not doing things that I'm like that are going to have consequences. So yes, it's the Adapt Women's Network. I'll put a link into the comments. So if you fancy joining us, and if you're a woman and you've got a new business, or you're looking to scale your business, do come along, because we do support each other. It's a brand new group. There's only a few of us in there at the minute, but it will grow. It's got an ADHD friendly feel. You don't have to have ADHD to be in there, but it is kind of ADHD friendly, and hopefully a bit of a softer approach to doing business. Because I think one of the things I found when I first started my business, it felt very masculine. And that, I think, was the whole LinkedIn thing. It felt very much like a masculine world. It's not, absolutely not. But I think we do business slightly differently to our male colleagues, and so we've got a bit of a softer feel. Okay, so human factors. How do you think it might support or impact somebody with ADHD or ADHD traits? Because let's face it, we're not great at detail. We're not great at being organised. Let's just put it out there. We're pretty rubbish at being organised and staying focused. So where can we bring human factors at a basic level into our business to help us?
So for me, the first thing is to accepting that's the case. So acceptance that, or recognition that those things might be happening. Because if you're denying it or refusing to look at it face on, it's not going to go away. So first of all, recognizing it's there, recognizing the impact that it's having on you, and also perhaps the impact that you're having on it. So it's a two-way thing. So recognize it's there, recognize the impact, and then make a decision. Can I live with it and therefore just accept it? Or what can I do or ask for help doing from tech, from other people, to support me in that which I recognize isn't necessarily going to work for me? So you use organization as a good example. So recognize that I'm not organized, recognize the impact that may have on my business. Might be I might miss things, or things don't get quite done when they should be done. Can I accept that? Because I recognize, so I'm talking about myself for a minute, I recognize that I'm better if I leave things to the last minute. I'm telling myself that. I don't think it's necessarily true. So leave it to the last minute and be comfortable with the fact that you're going to leave it to the last minute, because that's what drives you. And then find something or someone to hold you accountable and to give you those reminders. It is definitely finding something that will work for you. And, I can't sit here and say, do this, because that might not work for you, because something different will work for other people, for different people. So it's a case, is an electronic diary, is a calendar system going to work? Is a electronic to-do list? Is it having somebody phone you up every day and say, have you done this? Is it putting bells and whistles on your calendar? Is it writing long to-do lists? Is it making sure that for an hour a day you have a downtime, so that is your time where you're going to just do stuff? But it's finding something that works for you and not worrying that it's something that somebody else has told you to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think for me as well, I mean, over the 5 years I've been in business, I've definitely changed systems. And for a long time, I'd watched somebody on YouTube showing me this wonderful system or this wonderful software, and I'd go and download it, often buy it, and I'd use it for a few weeks, and then I'd forget to use it. It wasn't even like it wasn't doing the job. I would just forget to use it. And then I'd get so cross with myself and beat myself up so much for being so stupid. Why can't you just do this? And now I've learned, actually, maybe there was bits of it that weren't working, which is why it didn't hold me to it. So that's fine. That worked for that length of time. Now what can I find for this next month? And I might go back to that another time. Now, it might not be the most streamlined system, but I think over time you'll find the bits that work, bits that don't, and you'll pull them together.
It's funny, I've been sent on so many time management programs. I remember going on one where I had this a huge, great file of facts coming out of it, and it was brilliant. You know, I could do this and I could do that. I can do it. I think I used it for about a week. And I remember talking to a friend of mine. We were talking about Myers-Briggs and the perceiving, judging dimension of Myers-Briggs, and she said, "Oh, I'm P," and she said, "I'm not motivated by it. You know, it just doesn't motivate me." And I think with any time management organization thing is accept if that's not how your brain works, don't use it, and don't beat yourself up. So I'd spent a fortune on this Filofax thing, which looked awesome. I've still got it in my office, my old office up in the house. And I absolutely kept berating myself for not using it, and because it costs a lot of money. And I thought, but it's not how I work. So stop beating yourself up about it.
Tell me then, so you've been in business, remind me again, 4 years?
3 years, yeah, 3 and a bit
3
years.
years. Why do I struggle with that?
3.5 years.
What's the best bit of business advice you've been given in that time?
I think is just do it. I think we've been talking about other things as well. Just do it. Recognize what you're not good at. Outsource if you can to somebody else to do it. But fundamentally, just do it. Be yourself, because that's what people are buying.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we get into a bit of analysis paralysis before we ever get going. I've just created a brand new coaching program for my new business called Adapt, for the old thing. And the Adapt methodology is based around this idea of sort of acknowledging your current situation. You know, am I happy with what I'm doing? If the answer is no, let's do something about it. Let's accept that things aren't the way I want them to be. And then the 2 Ds, we've got desire. Okay, if this is what I don't want, what do I actually want? And you touched on this a little bit earlier about, you know, focusing on what you don't want stops you actually from thinking about, well, what do I want? What do I desire? So acceptance and acknowledgement into desire, and then into design. And the design is, okay, if this is what I want, what does it look like? What do I need to do to get there? And I think this is great because you've got this sort of, if you don't design what you want, it does tend to happen by chance, and it might not be what you want. But then we've kind of got to get out of that design phase. And I think this is where a lot of us get stuck. We're designing this wonderful idea, but we never act on it. So the next day in the Adapt is to activate those things that you've been designing. And so many of us don't take the leap from design to activate. So I totally agree with your bit of advice. Just do it. Yeah, maybe you want to spend a little bit of time just making sure, you know, you've got more than 300 quid in the bank is always a good idea. So I didn't either. I cut my ties. I completely went without any sort of financial safety net, really. So that's not to say be reckless, but, you know, think about it, design it, but then move on, act, do it, do something.
Do you know, it occurs to me that so many people spend so much time thinking, I wish I'd done. And, you know, I've been there, and I think for me, setting up my business was exactly the right time. I don't look at it and think, I wish I'd done it 10 years earlier. And I don't look at it and think, I wish I hadn't done it just before lockdown. For me, it was absolutely right. And I think there is a real comfort with just looking in and just saying to yourself, this is right for me. I can compare myself. You know, I've spoken to lots of people who say, oh, do you know, if only I'd gone freelance 10 years ago. And it's just accepting you are you, and what works for you works for you. And you're right, there's nothing you can do about it. But I think there is a point at which you just say, I need to do it.
Well, the problem is you can't do anything about the past. You can only do something about the now and the direction of your future. But how sad to be 5 years up the road looking back and thinking, actually, I could have done it then, and I didn't. And you have to have a rethink then. Well, okay, I didn't do it then. There must have been a reason. Now I'll start there. But I think we think we're going to learn before we do, but we don't. We learn from doing it.
I think I'm I consider myself really lucky in that I always live very much in the present. I don't think there's any point. I was very ill when I was in my 20s and almost died. And I think what that has given me is a don't worry about it. I'm not saying I kind of have a bit of I really don't worry about anything. Otherwise, I probably would have set up my business before. But I think I am lucky in that I can just go, that's happened. And not worry about the fact I hadn't done it earlier. Yeah, I still compare myself with people. I compare myself with you all the time. And I always think, oh, I wish I could do that. But ultimately, it's about me and it's about what I do and my strengths and living those.
Yeah, being true to yourself. Absolutely. Comparison does nobody any good. Because it's like comparing apples with pears. They're just, you are different to everybody else. You're unique. Don't compare yourself to others. Absolutely. Brilliant. Fab. So we will put your details in the comments. So if anybody wants to go and find Annette with her beautiful new branded website, we'll put that in. Yeah, fabulous. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And I do love your branding. Absolutely love it.
Thank you. So do I.